We all get that feeling, navigating life's relentless storms. The winds howl, the waves crash, and honestly, sometimes it feels like we're just entirely on our own in the dark, right? Well, today, we're diving into a really powerful devotional titled, God Said Move Forward. It's based on the ancient yet incredibly relevant text of Psalm 105. We're going to unpack this source material to really understand its historical blueprint for resilience and faith.
So, where is God when you feel completely forgotten? Wow, that's a heavy question. It's a deep fear we've literally all wrestled with at some point. But according to the text of Psalm 105, this heartfelt song of praise actually answers that fear directly. And it doesn't just hand us empty platitudes. Instead, it points us to God's undeniable, documented track record of faithfulness. It tells the reader, hey, give thanks, call on His name, and actually look back at the historical receipts of His amazing actions.
Part 1, Ancient Deliverance and Tracing the Covenant. Let's look back at the very beginning of this lasting agreement, starting way back when the chosen people were really just a vulnerable, wandering few.
The text maps out this absolutely fascinating timeline for us. This wasn't just some one-and-done promise. The author points out that this agreement was forged with Abraham, passed down to Isaac, and completely cemented for Jacob, literally spanning 1,000 generations. As they wandered from one nation to another, totally defenseless, the text highlights that God permitted no one to do them wrong. He actually rebuked earthly kings for their sakes, basically warning them, do not touch my anointed ones and do my prophets no harm. God stepped right in as their ultimate defender.
And the source brilliantly illustrates this with the life of Joseph. We see the brutal reality of his trials here, sold as a slave by his own brothers, hurt by fetters, laid in irons. The source tells us he was tested, deeply. But then, it points out that in perfect timing, he was elevated to become the ruler of the king's house and all his possessions. It's like a giant puzzle where, through betrayal and pain, God was weaving this masterful plan to save Joseph's family from famine. It really argues that even when someone hits absolute rock bottom and feels totally forgotten, God is actively at work. Fast forward a few generations, and the text details this terrifying sequence of judgments in Egypt. We're talking darkness, waters turning to blood, swarms of locusts, and flaming fire. Now, the devotional's key insight here is that these were not just random ecological disasters. No way. They were highly calculated signs designed to prove, without a doubt, that God was infinitely greater than the reigning earthly superpower that was trying to subjugate His people.
And the result of all that deliverance? Well, the Israelites definitely didn't just sneak out the back door in the middle of the night. The text notes they were let out completely healthy, loaded with silver and gold. In fact, Egypt was actually glad to see them go out of sheer awe and fear. Plus, the narrative shows God didn't just free them and say, all right, good luck in the desert. He spread a cloud to cover them by day, a fire to give them light by night, and miraculously sustained them with bread from heaven and water gushing straight from a rock.
Moving on to Part 2, Faith Through Modern History, Echoes of Deliverance. Here, the author argues that these ancient echoes resonate directly into our modern era.
The text documents this exact same faithfulness throughout modern history too. Take World War II, for example. During the Japanese occupation, many Christian missionaries and local believers in Asia faced severe internment. They were thrown into camps, entirely stripped of their freedom, surrounded by barbed wire. But, much like Joseph and his irons, they kept praying, they shared hope, and they cared for each other. And after the war, the historical accounts show they walked right out of those camps and went on to rebuild churches and entire communities.
We see it again with Harriet Tubman, often referred to as the Moses of the Underground Railroad. Born into slavery, she escaped, but then she relied on total dependence on God's voice to go back into danger over and over again. Braving massive bounties on her head and facing intense physical hardships, her complete reliance empowered her to guide hundreds of people out of bondage. The text highlights her as a profound modern example of God raising up a deliverer who trusts entirely in His strength.
All right, Part 3. Everyday faithfulness today, provision in the present. It's pretty easy to look at Moses or Harriet Tubman and think, well, sure, but they were extraordinary. But the source material shifts focus here to show that God still provides manna in our very ordinary, everyday wildernesses.
Take Pastor Ebenezer and the Christian workers in Sri Lanka that are highlighted in the text. They've been ministering in incredibly difficult financial and social conditions. Facing deep poverty and massive economic strain, they still had families to support and communities to lead. But they trusted in daily provision. And through steadfast prayer, the devotional notes that they literally watched doors open for support and self-help projects.
It allowed their ministries and churches to actually thrive in some of the toughest times imaginable.
The text applies this exact same principle to the professional realm. Operating in mission hospitals with severely limited resources, modern medical missionaries and disaster relief nurses report literally watching God multiply scarce medical supplies exactly when they're needed most. They describe seeing the modern-day equivalent of manna and quail as they treat patients and share hope in some of the darkest crisis zones on Earth.
And the devotional extends this concept right into our everyday homes. It highlights testimonies of ordinary families who faithfully tithe but suddenly find themselves facing unexpected job loss or really heavy trials. Kind of like the wandering Israelites, they face intense uncertainty. Yet, they report consistently experiencing timely, unexpected help. Maybe a new opportunity pops up, or provision comes from a community member, and it turns their homes into secure places of peace and hospitality. The overriding theme here? God is still actively guarding his people.
Part 4. Jesus, our ultimate deliverer, the promise fulfilled. According to the text, all of these stories we've covered are actually pointing to something even greater. The devotional anchors its ultimate message on this profound parallel: Jesus Christ as the absolute fulfillment of Psalm 105. The author draws a direct line between the ancient sufferings of Joseph and the deliverance of Moses straight into the New Testament. Just as Joseph faced betrayal, Jesus faced intense suffering. Just as Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, Jesus is presented as leading humanity out of the ultimate slavery of sin. And instead of just temporary manna in a desert, he offers eternal living water and the bread of life. The text concludes that his life perfectly fulfills those ancient promises. So no matter what circumstances someone faces today, there is a permanent reason to give thanks.
Which brings us to Part 5, a prayer of gratitude. Having traced this entire blueprint, the devotional concludes by shifting our focus toward gratitude, suggesting a specific posture of prayer based on the psalm.
The text offers a closing prayer thanking God for the history of faithfulness revealed in the psalm. It guides the reader to ask for that daily strength, to wake up and give thanks, to speak of these great deeds, and to deeply trust even when a season feels incredibly difficult and dry. It specifically asks for the resilience to remain as steadfast as Joseph when our patience and our lives are tested. The prayer then goes on to lift up modern pastors, ministers, and business leaders, asking that they honor God in their work. It includes Christian workers and everyday families, asking for that exact same divine protection that was promised to the anointed ones thousands of years ago. Ultimately, it seeks joy and gladness in our daily walks.
If you know someone who feels completely forgotten right now, like they're waiting in irons for a breakthrough, share this explainer with them today. Remind them of the incredible track record laid out in this text. And hey, please make sure to follow and return for our next deep dive as we continue unpacking these powerful concepts together. Until then, the devotional leaves us with one final provocative question to ponder. If the text claims the Creator hasn't forgotten a single promise in thousands of years, why would he ever forget you?